cannot understand how good the gospel is unless we understand the full and unadulterated anthropology or condition of man. That's how we understand. You remember when you came to salvation, perhaps, I don't know how dramatic your conversion story is, but perhaps when you came to salvation, you understood at that point that you were very bad. You were doing very, very evil things before the Lord. And that made the gospel seem so much more richer to you. It made the gospel look like it was nothing else you needed. It was just the gospel that you needed. Because you understood the foundational aspect of yourself, the condition of man. The world that we live around, we see the vile and the evil continuously. So that should bring the gospel, that should make the gospel key to your heart and give you such a great understanding of what the gospel is. My second point, Christ represented us in the atonement. Remember, why is this important? Christ's representation of us in the atonement. The atoning death of Christ. He nailed our debts to the cross. Once again, we are not worthy to be saved, right? But Christ showed mercy upon us when he died on the cross. We are not owed anything. We are not owed anything. God doesn't owe us anything. If anything, we deserve wrath, his wrath. We deserve to go to hell. But because of his mercy and grace, he saved us. And that's why the atonement is key. The way that we view man is the way that we view the beautiful nature of the atonement, the gracious mercy that was shown on the atonement. Okay? Third point, the way we preach the gospel. A lot of times we see people preaching the gospel, and we preach in a methodology that suggests that we can convince someone that the gospel is true. Now, this is not to say that you should not press the issue when it concerns the gospel, because there is eternal consequences when we view for that person that does not accept the gospel. Obviously, we should preach the gospel with much zeal and importance, because it is important. But this idea that you can convince man and say, I can convince him, maybe I can break out this history book, or maybe I can break out the evidence of the atonement, or maybe I can break out the evidence of the resurrection. And I can convince this person that the truth of the gospel is real. I'm sorry to break your hearts. You cannot convince anyone. It is by the work of the Holy Spirit upon which anyone is convinced that the gospel is true. So the very way that we understand the anthropology of man and the condition of man definitely leads us to the way that we preach the gospel. And that we cannot convince, all we can do is preach. Let the Holy Spirit do the convincing. And lastly, our standing before God. Because we became a Christian, because God has called us out of our sin, doesn't mean that we are to be in the same standing with God. Because we're better than the next man. No. It was all, once again, it was all mercy. It was all grace that he saved us. And this idea that your condition is totally eradicated. No, we still fall into sin. So our standing before God should be understood in the idea we owe him all worship. And we should be humble before him. We should be bowing our face to the ground and humbling ourselves before the throne of Christ, before the throne of grace. That's how we should understand our standing before God. And obviously this will lead, once again, we can go back in. This is lead to how we preach the gospel, right? Because we understand our condition, we understand that God showed mercy on us and God brought us out of our sin. That's how we preach the gospel, right? We show mercy, we're humble.